This is the news in detail on the hour from the WOR newsroom. North Vietnam's military attempt to smash through South Vietnamese lines has been met with an intense bombing attack by United States aircraft. In Washington, yet another public demonstration by some citizens opposed to the Vietnam War.
These are leaders of the nationwide youth organization that calls itself SDS, Students for a Democratic Society. It has more than 300 chapters on the college campuses of America. Its national and local leaders, in convention here at the Chicago Coliseum, June 1969, take the major credit for the rioting, mob actions, takeovers, and burnings on college and university campuses throughout the nation.
I'm Mike Clancy, National Secretary of SDS, and this is Bernadine Dorn, Inter-Organization.
In the late 60s, the campuses were boiling over with student activism. I mean, it was uneven, you know, it varied from campus to campus. Mm-hmm. And, but generally it was a high, there was a high point in the campus struggles.
Protest on college campuses was becoming kind of a normal feature of college life. You had the incident taking place on the Kent State campus, and of course that rippled all across colleges around the country. And so for the next several days, you had people in dormitories discussing, all kinds of action. I mean, people were so frustrated and so angry.
The atmosphere on campus was encouraging. That is, our professors and others thought that we were, quotes, idealistic young leaders. And we were highly encouraged and well thought of by the more senior people in our environment. At first, the media characterized the whole opposition in a trivializing way. So the whole frame here is of kids on a lark. So the first period was trivialization. So then there was a more serious attitude, and as elites themselves fell into contention about the war, coverage was more measured. The next evolution was to demonize the more militant factions and to characterize them in semi-deracinated ways.
There was an element of trivialization, demonization, and so on, which we sort of thought, I think we thought, insofar as we gave it any thought, that this goes with the territory. I mean, they have their own fish to fry, the media do. The administration could claim a big hunk of public opinion on its side, and there was no incentive from the media side to take us terribly seriously, even as their own reporters on the ground, I mean the better reporters from the wire services and the major papers and even the networks, were actually showing in their coverage of the war itself. There's a let's call it a slant in the media toward regarding the status quo order as generally as the baseline, as a good. And so then, so stories about movements are generally, as I wrote in the book, they're crime stories.
Good morning and welcome to Fox and Friends. First, I'm Heather
with the mush of microaggressions and safe spaces and diversity, the king of all things, as opposed to real solid education that they used to get at these academic institutions.
Well, now the selectively offended get to run the rest of the country. Evidence. All this is screaming and feelings. How about like a shred of evidence?
Meantime, at Yale University, the divide is growing between students fighting for free speech and those protesting alleged incidents of racial insensitivity on campus.
That utopia, it doesn't exist. It's not realistic. It does not exist. Good luck getting rid of all the bigotry.
This is creating a country of crazy people. How can you watch this and not go crazy and think that everyone who's involved in it is crazy in the first place?
How about that woman from...
according to one student, there are people breaking down, dropping out of classes, and failing classes because of the activism work that they are taking on.
Oh, wow, wow.
Of course, many of these kids are either, they get financial aid or their parents are paying. I wonder, Pete, if their parents truly understand what the kids are doing on campus.
These guys are they're out of their mind in their anti sort of establishment, anti the man sentiment, and they just can't go to class.
In a moment, we'll show you what's unfolding at Yale. But first, the new fallout at the University of Missouri, where protesters yesterday forced the resignation of 2 top officials, claiming they were not doing enough to crack down on incidents involving race. And you have to deal with that in life. You have to deal with it.
By the way, that screaming student has been identified by one media outlet as a Yale senior from a very upscale Connecticut suburb.
Panty-waist fascists. What we are creating is a group of people who are oversensitive to everything.
Today, the inmates run the asylum. The students have the dean so wrapped around their finger that they can do whatever they want, and no one tells them no. These are coddled elites. Coddled elites. Coddled elites.
Look at that moron.
Recently, there's been this weird language around millennials, right? And how millennials are coddled and how we're fighting about things that are really just not issues, and we just are so comfortable that we have to find an issue, to be outraged about, and this whole language around the entitlement of millennials, I think is distinct. And I don't get it, right? Because I'm not a millennial. I don't know what a millennial is, what it means, or what they're even trying to do with that term, except kind of belittle the things that we experience, not acknowledging, right, that the sort of baby boomer generation benefited from institutions that we are trying to reimagine today.
We should not have to be in pain every single day and continuously telling you that we are in pain for you to do something.
I think media outlets have to be more responsive to in terms of taking student activists seriously and not, pandering or trying to sort of belittle what our contributions actually are.
Absolutely.
So we try to be careful with what is the media outlet, what is the media platform for, and are their goals matching up with our goals?
It was basically an antagonistic relationship.
Right.
And the newspapers were all owned and controlled, well, kind of like they are today,
right,
by wealthy capitalists. And so we had no use for the mainstream media. And so our response was to create our own media. And that was a period when dozens of alternative newspapers sprung up.
So we started a newspaper called The Rag. They made no qualms about the fact that they weren't there to report the news. They were there to manipulate the news. A lot of times the coverage that you got from the media was dangerous.
Journalists don't really get a movement. It's just not a concept that registers for them. They get a protest, which is an action. Part of what's always going on is that the media it just doesn't compute that there's such a thing as a movement.
I do think that, social media has, especially in Ferguson, right, we see, there was a media, there's a media blackout and people were sort of tweeting to get the news out about what was going on there, right? So I do think there's a sort of way that social media has managed to sort of democratize, right, representation, but at the same time, right, that's not a real connection. It's not an actual community, right? So I think what we understand as the media itself has to be diversified, right? When we say media, what do we mean, right? Do we mean corporate media, which is a problem? Do we need print media, which is a dying medium? Do we mean social media, right? Do we mean sort of pop culture references? Are we talking about Beyonce's Formation, right? What do we mean by media? Because I think that the critique has to be leveled along those axes.
The things about the newspaper is that you're not choosing what's on the front page. One of the things about getting your news from the internet is that you're choosing what you read. So we tend to live in very homogeneous bubbles. Think of the country as a checkerboard of political subcultures each one is homogeneous, although there may be many of them. And it's not good for being a political strategist or person or change agent if all you know is your own bubble.
I don't think the media coverage of any movement, right, even in retrospect, has been an honest one, or an accurate one, or one that sort of tells the history from the inside out, right? I don't care, you know, what the media representations are of activists. I care what the communities we serve think about us. I don't necessarily care what the media thinks. Now, that's not to suggest that I'm not aware of the fact that the media can impact the way even our own communities perceive us, right? I'm completely aware, but I think that the only way to counter that, right, is to actually engage directly with those communities, right? The only way to sort of demystify the movement is to talk to people. And that's what we've been doing. And so I don't think I could come up with a singular approach, right, to dealing with media representations. All we can do is to clarify our own message the best we can. And the media helps with that, right? Representations of us in the media can help us to perhaps clarify our message in a way. But it doesn't dictate our actions, and I don't think it'll ever be representative.
We're talking sort of transnationally as well as nationally and rooting ourselves within the actual communities that we come from.
A lot of the work that we're doing was a part of our own, for our own selves, you know, in a collective kind of way, right? And that's important, and to have a media source to respect that, right? And to honor that this is not just some you know, some random words on a page, but these are actual bodies that are talking, right? And so it's important to, you know, that a media source or media outlet that we, you know, that respect our humanity.
My point is that organizations mobilize sentiments that they don't necessarily create. They may ultimately get so large and their members active and vocal enough to create sentiments. But their initial function is to mobilize that which is waiting for them.
I think most of us are very much rooted in the communities that we come from as well as the communities that we where we're studying.
Really nothing, hardly anything effective in social movement terms of people who are atoms. The question is whether they can or are organized.
And kind of realizing that like everyone has a role as a leader, like creating a leaderful movement as opposed to a central leader movement.
I guess if I were to sort of say one last thing on this issue, I would say that the media and activism are sort of contrapuntal, right? So in music, you know, you have this understanding, you have a counterpoint, where you have two musical lines, and sometimes they are harmonious and sometimes they're dissonant. And I think that's how the media relates to activism. That's really the best analogy that I can come up with.
Yeah.
Sometimes the media really manages to shed light on things. Sometimes it only exists to distort what's happening. And I think our job is to stay vigilant about what those representations are and to not rely on them to do our work. Because what I believe is nothing short, right, of a complete decolonization of this thing that we call the university, right? I believe in nothing short of complete liberation for everybody, right? I believe in nothing short in particular, right? Complete and total liberation and reparations for people of African descent all over the world, right? That's what I believe. Any way we can make this place more livable, right, is a victory. Whether or not it serves, right, the ultimate goal of liberation for all, we can only know in retrospect, right? In the meantime, we are just engaged in a kind of battle for space.